Hi everybody! I want to spend just a couple minutes talking about character development. We mentioned it a little bit last week in our discussion forums, and we also talked about it very briefly in the earlier video from this week's announcements. Character development is a necessary part of our writing. It's integral. Without engaging characters, we really don't have a story, do we? At least in terms of fiction. And the challenge is often when we're writing, we notice that our characters seem lacking, a little flat. Maybe they're not as complex, maybe they're boring. But just for some reason, they don't reach out and grab us like some of the beloved characters that we've experienced in fiction. And typically this comes from, as our text indicates, a lack of time getting to know our characters. This is integral. Writing is not user-friendly. It takes a lot of time. We've talked about how we have to dedicate time every day working with our writing, actually just writing. We also need to take time, if not daily, at least regularly, to get to know our characters. And when we're starting out with a new story plan, we need to spend a significant amount of time getting to know our characters. And while this might seem a little bit harsh around the edges, the reality is if you don't take the time to get to know your characters completely, you have no business whatsoever writing their lives. I mean, that only makes sense. We're creating this world for these guys, and if we're not taking the time to understand them as people, as beings, if we're writing fantasy and they're not necessarily people, but if we don't take the time to know them, we can't really write about them in a way that does them justice. So what we need to do is sit down, and some writers call it interviewing. We need to interview our characters. We need to know everything that there is to know about them, know them as well as we know ourselves. And that's not to say that the characters will not surprise us. More than one author has said that their character has done something totally unexpected, or they were trying to get their character to do something and that character wouldn't listen and just decided to do something else. It does make us sound a little bit crazy, but we're writers, that goes with the territory. But you need to know so that you can at least expect what your character will do in a given situation. You need to know how tall they are, what their weight is, what they look like, what kind of clothes they wear, but you also need to know how they react with their environment. Your characters can't simply be, they have to do. They need to interact and engage, and it's all about the details in terms of our character development. Knowing them is half the battle, and then telling your reader about it in a style that fits your voice and your story is how you create rich, engaging characters. Now, it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it. It's a funny turn of phrase, isn't it? It goes without saying, but I'm still going to say it. Stereotypical characters do have a time and a place in some stories, but typically they're caricatures of themselves or they're used as a plot device. If you have the absolutely perfect, brave hero and there's no flaws at all, that's a writing trope. It's a romance novel trope, and those characters are boring. We want to avoid stereotypical and kind of tropey characters. We want to have full, detailed, complex beings that have something to do, they have something to grow, they've got conflict, they're challenged, they're stubborn and frustrating, and actually react with the world. Typically, when we're talking about character development, we focus on our main characters, and that's absolutely necessary. But we don't want to ignore our supporting cast either. So make sure that you do take time to get to know all of your supporting and secondary characters too. Of course, you don't necessarily need to interview them for hours and hours and hours on end, depending on the level of their support in your story. But you do need to have an active understanding and so-called working relationship with all of your characters. So how do we do that? There's a couple different ways, a couple different tricks that a variety of writers do, and I'm just going to show you a couple that I found in my experience to work for me, and I got from other people, if I can get my screen to work. Yay. Alright, some of you guys may recognize this. This is what we call a character sheet in the gaming world. This is Pathfinder, Pathfinder, D&D, that kind of stuff, tabletop role-playing games. And if you've never so-called rolled the dice, this character sheet might not be helpful to you, but it's a good way to start for those of you who are familiar with it. It's got a lot of information on here just to give you ideas of the kind of personality issues that we need to explore. We look in skills, for example. Can they climb? Are they diplomatic? What kind of knowledge do they have? Do they carry any weapons? Maybe you're writing that kind of story. We need to think about how strong our character is. What's their constitution? Are they easily scared? Do they throw up when they see a spider? That would be an interesting character, wouldn't it? And then towards the end, we've got other stuff within the Pathfinder. What kind of gear do they carry? What kind of clothes do they always wear? Do they have specialized knowledge? Do they have special abilities? How much money do they have? All that kind of stuff. And of course, this sheet's not going to work for everybody, but it's a good way to show you how some of the stuff that we do in our life outside of writing can transition quite nicely into helping us with our development, with our thinking process. Other things that we do is have conversations with and about our characters. We need to really get to know our characters. We need to know their background. Where does he live? What does he do? What does he know? What super specialized knowledge does he have? For example, is he a guy who, though he's never been on a boat, he knows how to tie knots because when he was a kid, his grandfather taught him. This is the stuff that we need to know about our character. Of course, we want to do the typical interview questions. What are their greatest strengths, weaknesses, and fears? What's their favorite stuff? Are they political? And by stuff, I mean movie, song, book, color, plant, tree. What's their favorite cloud shape? We need to know everything that we can. There's Evie. How would he describe himself? What does he believe in? What haunts him? These are all questions that we need to know about our characters in order to make a full fleshed out character. Of course, we want to have some typical questions here. Who are their parents? What are their siblings? What's their ethnic background? Where have they lived? Do you know the specific place? What jobs have they had? All of this stuff makes these people who they are. Do they travel? Do they have friends? Do they have enemies? Scroll. There's the physical appearance. How are they built? What's their posture? What's their head shape? Their eyes or nose? Do they have scars, tattoos? What kind of voice do they have? Is it a really big guy, think like Gaston or the Beast, but it has a super high-pitched voice like Truman Capote? Why? Why would that person have that voice? Maybe there's an interesting story there, right? We need to go through and what are their favorite foods? What are typical expressions? When they're happy, do they smile or do they just kind of smirk? When they're sad, do they cry or do they just punch the wall? What do they laugh at? What makes them laugh? And you know, sometimes we laugh at ridiculous stuff, right? So what we need to do is interview our character, ask all of these questions. We've got one more example that I want to show you. And all of these are available in our announcement. We want to think about more than just what do they look like, what are their favorite things. We really need to get to know these guys, okay? So we've got to ask ourselves deeper questions. You know, we can ask what is their faith, because faith drives characters just as much as it drives people. But we also want to think about other things, like more pointed, more deep things. What is a common phrase they use over and over? You know that I use the phrase awesome way too much. Why do I do that? Why would a character say awesome until it almost doesn't mean anything? Is it because they're a child of the 80s, or does it make them feel good and so they're just trying to make everyone else feel good? What makes them laugh out loud? How do they display affection? In romance novels, we're falling back on my favorite, in romance novels, often the hero is this cold, standoffish, masculine sort of guy who just doesn't cry. But he shows his affection by breaking down and showing his feelings for his heroine. How does your character display affection? Does he high-five everybody like the Todd in Scrubs? Or does he, you know, do the manly punch on the shoulder? Or is he a hugger and he hugs everybody? We need to think about our characters as people, okay? And, you know, like I said before, it might sound harsh, but if you're not going to take the time to get to know these guys, you have no business writing their life. Now, we've talked about the big questions and the little questions. Ask questions, do questionnaires, explore your character, talk about them, talk with them. But it takes more to making a good character and developing a good character than knowing everything about them. We also need to know how they interact with the world. For example, if they're cold, do they grab for that sweater? Or do they light a fire? Or do they smoke a cigarette so their hands are warm? If they feel the breeze coming through the trees, can they hear it? Do they feel it skitter across their skin so that they have goose flesh popping up? Those are the kind of details that we're going to want to write that bring our character from this abstract person that we know everything about to a flesh and blood character that our reader can truly experience. For example, this is one of my stories I got published a while ago. This first paragraph, we can get kind of an understanding for who Mavis is. The coolness of the bar sent shivers over Mavis's flesh as she stepped through the scarred wooden doorway. The dim, dry air served as a stark contrast to the muggy heat of midsummer pounding on the pavement outside. The humidity made her hair, normally smooth and somewhat collected, float about her head like a frazzled red cloud, despite the industrial strength elastic and plethora of bobby pins she'd used in a vain attempt to tame it down before leaving the house. She felt damp, sticky, and unkempt. She disliked feeling damp, sticky, or unkempt. Now, we hear a lot about Mavis in this example here. Okay, we know a little bit about her environment. It's hot. Maybe she's out in a city, just from that description. But we see Mavis interact with her environment. We know that her hair is kind of frizzy. We know that she doesn't like to feel damp, sticky, or unkempt, so maybe she's a little bit of a girly girl. We know that she has red hair, because there's just that little drop of red hair. She has to use industrial strength elastic to pull her hair back, so maybe she's got that thick, full red hair. We know that she is physically sensitive to the transition from hot to cold. And we know that she, by the words stark contrast, muggy heat, pounding, that she's really not a fan of hot and humid weather. So by knowing these things about my character Mavis, I can describe her and bring her into my audience's mind with a clearer picture. So character development takes more than just knowing what your character looks like, knowing what they feel like, knowing if they believe in God or not. It's also about thinking how they're going to react with their environment. I could have just said Mavis walked into the door, which is actually kind of unclear because maybe she actually walked right into a door, right? So Mavis entered the bar, and that gets the job done, right? But it doesn't really bring our character to life for our reader. So yes, ask those questions, build that character, know your character in and out. But remember, a character needs to do more than just be. They need to do. They need to interact with that environment. If a skunk gets hit on the road, they need to smell it, and you need to, if it fits your story, let your reader experience the world. And that's a good way to put it. Our characters are more than just tools to get the story out. They allow our readers to experience the world that we're creating through them. So that is a long-winded discussion, apologies, on getting started with character development. So one of the things that I challenged you, and I mentioned this earlier, is to get to know one of your characters. I would like you to interview one of your characters and let's get a conversation going on the general discussion forum about it. Character development's a work in progress. You got an idea for somebody in your head? Let's get to know them. Let's bring them to life on that page. It's going to be great. You're going to do awesome with it.